Welcome, everyone. I'll let everybody start to join. It always takes a few seconds when you hit the button. We're excited they're able to join us this morning. My name is Jackie Eaton, and I'm the Community Action Program for Children, or CAPC, Training and Education Coordinator at the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute. And we're so excited today to be able to offer the workshop, Child-Centered Injury Prevention, Practicing Empowering Relations. And I'm thrilled to be co-hosting this with my colleague, Robin Stewart, who is the Child Injury Prevention Program Coordinator, as well as our speaker, Dr. Michelle Bauer, who will be joining us in a second. Before we get started, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. And Robin and I are both joining today from Treaty 6 in the homeland of the Métis. We would like to take time to pause and give thanks for all that this land means to each and every one of us. We both work at the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute, which provides services to treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10. And we acknowledge the various ancestral territories of the Nahiawak, Nahithawuk, Nahinawuk, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Ananishpek, Nakaway peoples, and the homeland of the Métis. We acknowledge the treaties of these lands and reaffirm the responsibilities and commitments to healthy relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. At the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute, we are committed to understanding the history of colonialism and playing a positive role in the important process of truth and reconciliation. We invite you to share in the chat what treaty land you are currently participating from. This topic for me today really reaffirms for me the importance of doing land acknowledgements and considering what the land offers to me. I live, work, and play on this land, but I'm so grateful for all that have come before and the lessons that I've learned, particularly when thinking about relationships. As I mentioned, the Prevention Institute, that's where I work with Robin, and it is a nonprofit provincial organization that has been in existence for over 40 years. Our mandate is to help all children thrive through primary prevention and the promotion of well-being. We believe that all children have the right to the best physical, social, and emotional health possible. I would now like to hand it off to Robin.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again so much for being here today to watch Child-Centered Injury Prevention, Practicing Empowering Relations. For your information, all of you are muted at the moment, but we will have opportunities for discussion throughout the workshop as well as at the end. You will be invited to unmute or use the chat box for discussions, and we will be doing some breakout rooms. The chat box is also available if you have any comments or technical support questions during the presentation. We're together for 1.5 hours today, and breaks have been scheduled throughout the workshop. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. If the recording is going to be shared, the discussion pieces will be removed from that recording. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michelle Bauer. Dr. Michelle Bauer works at the BC Injury Research and Prevention Unit as a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Pediatrics, Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia. She is supported by funding from the BC Children's Hospital Research Institute. Her research explores the intersections of family and child injury prevention and safety by examining children's risk-taking during play and parental experiences with injury. In 2023, she was selected by the Institute as one of 3 candidates to join the Empowering Next Generation Researchers in Perinatal and Child Health program. Findings from her research have been presented at national and international conferences, including the WHO's Safety Conference in Australia in 2022, and have been published in peer-reviewed journals such as Child, Care, Health and Development. She is passionate about strengthening and employing empowering practices with families in injury prevention research, and she employs these practices in current projects to examine perspectives and experiences with risk, injury, and outdoor play, including with emergency room doctors in British Columbia and families in Syrian refugee camps in Lebanon. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Bauer. I didn't ask if you prefer to just go by Michelle. We are very excited, and I know we're going to learn a lot from you. And with that, I pass it on to you.
Wow, what a warm welcome, Robin. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Yeah, and thank you so much, Jackie. So just thank you everybody for having me and for joining me in this conversation. I know it might be, I hear it's actually not as chilly as I expected in Saskatchewan right now. I'm in British Columbia, but here it's quite chilly and dreary. So we have a lot of rain and things like that. So you'll probably see me sip my tea throughout the session today. But yeah, lovely to see you. For those I can see on video, thanks for joining and welcoming me into that space that you have, and just everybody for taking the time. So I'll be sharing some slides with you. And I also want to reiterate that for me, this is also a chance to get to know everybody. So I try as much as possible, whether it's in a course I'm teaching, whether it's just in a conference where I get to meet people, to try to make some sort of community out of it. So I think that's such a privilege to be able to do. So if you are someone who wants to share perspectives throughout this time, you'll see that I actually use discussion as a way to sort of engage with a lot of these points. So I really strongly encourage discussion and questions and things like that. Sorry, throughout the period of time. So please do, feel free to join me in that discussion, especially when I ask those questions, because it'll help me also form some thoughts about how I can maybe even help with some of the tools that I'm suggesting, or with some of the session material. I would hope that at the end of this, you have some thoughts to take away with you into your own really important work, to help you feel either more confident or just interested in something. Something that you can apply to what you're doing is really key. So thank you again for having me. I am joining you from the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. What's really beautiful for me is that I've been really interacting with how I can honor the fact that I'm also playing on this land. I live in this land. I have the privilege of living here, and play is so essential to what I'm doing with my work. And it's what I'm so passionate about with kids and with families, is learning all of the joy that we can have from just having that exploration around us. And I'm just so in love with what I'm able to interact with, especially moving out here in Vancouver. The beautiful trees and the ocean, and I never take that for granted. So just very honored and very happy to be here. I've broken this down into 3 different chapters. So the first is that I'd like to just introduce some of the landscapes for child-centered or child-focused research within injury prevention. And I say beyond because I want you to feel that this is also, it's being able to apply to different realms. It's not just within, injury prevention, although some of these conversations will largely focus on that. It's my hope that you can sort of take some of this information and apply it to your fields and, those cross sort of disciplines. I'll consider the strategies that were historically used in injury prevention for recruiting participants, and then how we are trying to continue to create space for the child voice. And I say continuing to try because I think it's important to acknowledge that there are so many ways that we can still improve this and strengthen how we're thinking about it and engaging with it. Chapter 2 will be, I have a few tools. I call them tools because, as you'll see at the end, we'll try to do a toolkit together. But just ways of thinking, right? Strategies you can use, resources for yourself that might resonate with you in terms of what you can apply to the work that you're doing. So I'll take you through some of my own thoughts and engagement with some of these terms, concepts, strategies, empowering relations, the use of reflexivity, considering vantage points, That's something I've more recently been working on within my own work. And then new and revisited considerations for working with children. So once again, sort of new tools that I'm coming across or that have helped me in the work. And then chapter 3 will be the toolkit development. So what works for you? And having some conversations with people in the room and myself and the hosts about what these tools could mean for you, or maybe some other thoughts that you have about them.
Michelle, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Can you just click your slides as a slideshow so that we just, otherwise it's really
Oh,
small
it's
and it's just
small.
better.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you
Yeah.
could, thank you very
I'm
much.
just gonna have to stop, I think, sharing my screen for a second. Beginning. Okay, I think this should be better now.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Can you see this big, or is it in note form for you?
Yeah, no, this is big. This is the slides. That would be
Oh,
great.
great. Okay,
Thank
perfect.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Um, So first, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. I know I did get that very warm welcome, and Robin, you spoke about some of the work that I'm doing, but it might help to put a bit of it into context. So my PhD is in population health, so I like to say that I'm an interventionist by trade. I sort of understand when I'm working with injury, different ways that we might be able to work with communities, with partners to do built environment work, understand sort of social constructs around risk and injury. But this is largely based within my training in this domain. And then my master's was in human kinetics. So that's where you'll see the play stuff come in. And when I actually first got into this field. And then my bachelor's was in psychology. So I've sort of leapt around in different ways, I'm sure, as most of us have in our own ways. I work through many partnerships. So right now I'm at the BC Injury Research and Prevention Unit here in Vancouver in the Faculty of Medicine. And I work under the supervision and directorship of Dr. Ian Pike, who is the director for the BC IRPU. And I work with a really fantastic team of about 15 people who heavily would encourage you to get to know if you ever have the chance. They're fantastic, just lovely human beings. So yeah, that's a privilege that I have right now. I'm with the BC Children's Hospital Research Institute, so that's where you'll see some of my research with the doctors come out. And a lot of the projects I have are funded through the Research Institute there. MENAPAIR is more recently a partnership I've developed with the American University of Beirut, and that is when I'll talk about some of my research with Syrian refugee families in camps and in villages across Lebanon. This is the Middle Eastern and North African program that is run by Dr. Samar El-Haj and her partners out of the university. I have partnerships with the University College Cork and Cran Centre in Ireland, and working primarily with children and families with neurophysical disabilities, creating sort of play spaces and outdoor recreational centers that are focused on engineering, designed and informed by these families. Society for Children and Youth here in BC, Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, and of course the Enrich program, so the Empowering Next Generations Researchers in Perinatal and Child Health program. And my projects have spanned many areas. So more recently, as I'll discuss, refugee, child, and family health. My postdoctoral research is focused on working with children here in Vancouver from low and mid-income communities to understand perspectives on risk, injury, and play outdoors, especially around sort of as much as possible promoting the child voice and how to better align engagement strategies and recruitment strategies to work with children. I'm also working with emergency room doctors to bridge these conversations within parental exposure to risk and injury and how that can influence parents' understanding of their children's risk-taking, their parenting strategies and their protective strategies towards their children. Immigrant Indigenous families, there are some projects I have that span partnerships with these communities. They are led by Indigenous partners. And so some of this work right now concentrates on understanding Indigenous and immigrant family perspectives on being new parents, and then how the resources that they get at hospitals might resonate, might not resonate, and then what we can do about that. And just a diversity of fathers and mothers. So I've worked with rural, single, gay families, and understood sort of the intersections of gender within this space and responsibility that parents can feel for keeping children safe. I would really like to get to know the room a little bit. This is the first time I'm meeting, I think, most people here. And so I'm wondering in the discussion, if I can ask, what are we hoping to learn here? Or what are we interested in sort of joining with? What do you want to strengthen? I just put up some prompts here that we might be able to have a bit more of a discussion about. So in other words, how can I help with what I'm saying? How can I help you and maybe feel confident or strengthened in what you're doing? And I think I just have to lower the slide to be able to see people's conversation. I'll give it a minute, because I know everybody sort of takes different time to write or to engage, and there's no pressure at all. Once again, it's just welcoming that space and that engagement. Okay, so, and please correct me if I'm not speaking properly for your name, because I actually really value that. So Jordash, you said, honestly, I just started this job 3 weeks ago and I've never been in this kind of position before. So my boss told me to sign up. Well, hopefully this helps. Jordash, do you want to share what your job is? Why your boss might have recommended this type of workshop for it? You don't have to. Once again, just following up, but you don't have to reply to this. Emma says, I'm also new to the world of pediatric injury prevention, hoping to get a better understanding of how this can differ from adult injury prevention. I'm a parent aide on red pheasant cremation. Ah, okay. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that gives me context too. Cindy says, how to engage families in discussion without them feeling like they're being criticized. Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and that's something that I am still working towards. A lot of what I'm discussing today is not, as I said, right, it's a continual sort of growth within myself as well. It's not something that I think people have just finessed, and I think that there are a lot of inherent sort of issues just because the foundation for research that a lot of us use is adult centered. It's based on tools, it's based on methods, approaches that have been devised by adults for adults, and we're only now really applying them differently or considering other sort of strategies within that space. So there's a lot of learning to do, including that engaged part for listening. Robin, I'm hoping to learn more about how children's voices can be welcomed into research and how we can apply similar ideas into hearing children's perspectives, frontline work. Oh, thanks, Robin. Robin says, I was lucky to see Michelle present on some of her research last year and have enjoyed learning from her in the past. Oh, that's nice. Janice, you have your hand up. Do you want to share a bit? Okay, that's okay. And then Fatma says, my name is Fatma. I'm a Healthy Families home visitor with family services in Red Deer, Alberta. For me, just to learn different strategies and more knowledge to share with families. Oh, nice. Okay, so for time, I'm going to continue on, but if you do want to share more, please type it in the chat and I will look at this even over a break just to go back. I do care about what you're putting in the chat. It's not just lost to the ether of chat dialogue. And Alejandro, we work with families at the Triple P, and one of the principles is to have a safe, interesting environment, to provide better understanding for what that means. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. So thank you for sharing. That gives me more context too. And yeah, I'm feeling that some of this might actually resonate with what you're interested in joining for. So that's great. That's always the plan. So I'm going to start. I'll actually go back. Sorry, I have
Sorry,
to go back
Michelle.
to.
Just
I know.
if you could go, but sorry. Thanks.
It's my fault. It's okay. Okay, from the beginning. Okay, I think we're on track again. Okay, so I'll start with a story. So when I was starting out in my master's degree, this was my first introduction to the field of qualitative approaches. I had only done quantitative before this in my undergrad. And I was conducting a study with single stay-at-home and gay fathers to understand intersections of gender perspectives, and parenting and responsibility that that the fathers were feeling, but also understanding how those perspectives on masculinities, on gender, might actually shape their protective strategies towards child injury prevention. And what was really, really interesting to me is when I entered this space of safety research more broadly, I really thought I would be having more conversations with families about things like helmet use, or about, my child fell down, we had to go to the hospital, that sort of dialogue. And one of the first interviews I had with a father, we were in a cafe and it was late at night. And I always remember we were having our tea together in the back. And that conversation for an hour and a half was focused on understanding his grief around the loss of his 6-year-old son, how he felt that he did not have parenting supports. He was a recently divorced single father. And so his surviving son was everything to him. He was very protective, he considered himself overprotective because, and he linked this back to the loss of his 6-year-old and the guilt that he felt in not getting him to the hospital in time. So this conversation for me sort of opened me up to what the conversation really is for some families whose voices are getting lost in scholarship. We're not really understanding, and I don't think we've done a great job at understanding the nuances involved in experiences with trauma, with grief, with injury exposure in childhood, and what that does to families who are seeking care, or who are trying to just protect children from being injured again. There's a lot of that story that's missed. So that was something that I learned. And that conversation was actually, he was crying for about 20, 30 minutes of that conversation and didn't want to stop. He wanted to share his voice. He wanted to contribute to having this. And that really changed me. It changed the way I was thinking about what I was getting into in terms of safety. And I left that conversation thinking to myself, someone should really study this. And so I decided as I went, and I just grew so in love with this field, that that is what I would dedicate my life to do. And that is something that I am still incredibly privileged to be able to do, is to work with parents from all different communities, all different backgrounds, who go through at times very traumatic experiences, who are going through loss, who experience grief, to understand what those intersections are, what it is we're missing. And there's still so much work to do in this space. So please do not think that any of my work is just covering what is to be done within this. That's not at all true, but hopefully it provides a bit of a foundation for how we're understanding this type of voice within the space. So I actually start with that story, and it's not just because I want to, lead into things in a conversation like this, in a workshop. It's because it stands out to me as being really fundamental in what we are missing and why I do what I do. So I'll ask a quick question. We won't spend too much time on it in the chat, but why do you think children's voices are not always included in injury prevention research? So if you want to answer any of these sort of probes that I have here, what may some of the challenges be to working with children? Maybe what you faced or what others you know have faced. Why are children's voices important to consider? Any thoughts you might have around this are welcome. Yeah, I won't read out names, I'll just read out responses a little bit. So they're often not taken seriously, I find. Yes. Yeah, they're not always included due to their age. Yes, ethics, approvals, access to children can be difficult to receive. They usually ask the parent right away and not the child. We do not trust their sweet, not fully developed brains. They're still developing and learning boundaries. Yeah, so definitely I'm already sensing these themes, right? I think we do understand is that there is this sort of, we go to the parent first, and obviously for ethical reasons that also needs to be done. We need to get those permissions from caregivers to make sure that everything's appropriate for what we're hoping to achieve and the engagement that we have with the children. And so I think it's just really important to also understand how can we then use that same intent that we have towards the research with the kids themselves to have those conversations. And Alejandra says, meaningful to consider what they've to say. We as adults may reflect our own anxieties and fears. Yeah, and it's that reflection, right? That sort of placement of our own thinking about the research that typically we can have happen to the kids, right? Is we already have these own sort of biases or these own assumptions about what we know, and maybe also as health practitioners or as health professionals, people within spaces like leisure, coming in, working with kids thinking, well, we have this training, we have this information, so we probably know what's best for the kid. And it's that mindset that can hide a lot of what we have yet to really understand. And that's the problem, is making sure that we're getting those communications with the kids in a way that is meaningful to them, where they're sharing deeply what they think and what they know, not just that they're answering for the sake of answering and then, off to do something else because this wasn't interesting to them. So building environments that are very playful, interesting to children is really essential. And just for time, I'm going to continue, but please, as I said, feel free to continue to share.
Hi. Hi, can I add something?
Yeah, of course. Hi,
Yeah.
Fatma.
Hi. Just going back to the question, sometimes what is the question again? I forget about it.
Oh, there are
Yeah.
three prompts.
So yeah,
Yeah.
the first one, why do you think children voices are not always included? I will say, as an immigrant, or as you are a newcomer to any country, of course there is a lot, like if your child get injured because you have a wrong information, you always not gonna report that because you're scared that your child will be taken away from you. So this is, I think, one of them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And that is something we see in different populations who experience marginalization, are also this feeling that if you voice something, your child could be taken from you. When I was working with gay fathers, for example, in research, they were actually voicing how they are nervous to bring their kids to hospitals because they're worried that they might be seen as bad fathers at a time when they're already feeling very, very discriminated against as parents within that space. And they were telling me that they feel they're really the bottom of the list in terms of adoption as it stands. So they wanted to be, to feel for themselves that they were really, really good as a father to their child, that the child was not getting injuries, was always safe, was always taken, was always sort of protected within their care. And once again, these are most of the fathers that were saying this, but I don't want to assume that whenever whenever I'm speaking about this research, it's usually not that every single parent said this to me, but I will speak to greater themes or sort of discourses within that. So feasibility is a big thing. So working with children in research can take more time, right? It requires us to do work. It requires us to be different. The way I speak with a parent is not usually the way I speak with a child. And it's about learning in real time how to adapt that. And that's difficult. I don't think as human beings, we're used to changing ourselves all the time for where we're at. And with children, it's important to do that intentionally and meaningfully, not just for the sake of extracting perspective, but for making them feel like they are wanted, like they have an option themselves of choosing you as someone they're speaking to. So creating opportunity for them to choose or feel comfortable within spaces is incredibly important. And an example of this in my own work is one thing that I have not done that I am trying to do more of now is making sure that children feel they have voice to decide once they've set up an interview location for me. If a child says, I want to be interviewed by this tree, when we get to the tree, to say, do you still want to do this here? Is this still okay for you? Now that we're here, do you want to look around and tell me if anything's bothering you about the space? Is there any way that we can change this? And what we were finding is that if I was working, let's say I do a lot of outdoor work, I was doing a lot of outdoor work with kids. And so if they would select spaces, but then the environment changes so quickly. So if there were too many cars on the road near where we were trying to do the interview, they didn't like that. Or if there was, dirt on the ground or disposed medical masks was something that they didn't like, right? They want to feel comfortable and they want to feel like they have options. And I think this is true for no matter what research you're doing, is just make sure that children have options to decide in real time if they're comfortable. Not just if they've signed up for something to do with their parent, but if they, need other things from that space or from that time. So it takes time to build trust for recruitment. When I was working with children in the low and mid-income communities, a big part of this was I was welcomed by the adults in their lives, not by them, right? Children aren't the ones going, what researcher do I want to work with? It's their parents saying, or it's, the educators at their camp saying, hey, Michelle's coming in. She's this researcher, but she's going to hang out with us and do these things if you want. But I'm already there. I'm already in their space, right? The choice has already not been completely theirs. So it's important to understand that to them, you're coming into a space and they don't know you. And that's big, right? For children, it's a very big thing to have trust that the person you're talking to, that is not someone you know, cares about what you're saying and that they can share more than just a yes or no answer with you about something. So that familiarization can take time. It took me 2 weeks with some of the kids that said they wanted to participate, but then ran and hid in the bathroom with me for them to feel comfortable. And in the end, they told me they were very happy to participate. I was working with at a day camp, for a few weeks. And even though they would play with me, it was different when they had to sit with me and share perspective. And so that can take time to build up. So if you're doing child-centered research, I would say one thing to look for is really how you can be present for longer periods of time in that space, and make sure that you're integrating yourself in a way that is not just about research or is not just about the specific work you're doing. Things as simple as, can I get you a glass of water for a kid? Do you want to, I'll just stand next to you as we line up to go to the playground together and talk to you about Pokemon. But developing relationships, right? It's something that we do in our work with adults, but it's something that requires different strategies for kids, but also you have to do that meaningfully. You have to do it in a way where your interest is on them and where they're at. So adapted use of tools, so different questionnaires requiring their own validation can take time, making sure you have the right surveys, questionnaires you're giving children, making sure that the language you're using is appropriate for them, that it's going to resonate. different engagement strategies include recruiting. So how are you actually recruiting child populations? Is it through the family? If it is through the family, are you just working alone with the families? Are there other people involved? You know, these are all things that can take a lot of time. And in the work that I've done, it certainly stands out to me as when I'm working directly with children, that work typically takes me more time because I'm building up these relationships with people, and I'm trying to do it in a way that is not just, here I am, you can speak to me or not. It's really about trying to feel that you can be welcomed in that space if they want that. So I'll work you through some tools I use, and hopefully they can resonate with some of the work you're doing as we go. So one thing that I think of a lot is this monster in the room type of thing. And that's something that I felt a few times is there's this key role of trust, right? Children have to, and families have to trust you. And sometimes they have to do that within a very small amount of time, right? When I was working with refugee families, I don't have all that. I don't have weeks with them. I was sometimes just with them for a day. So to establish trust within that period of time, it doesn't always happen. It's not that you are guaranteed trust with a family, nor should you be, right? That's up to the family sort of to decide for themselves if that's what they need at that time. But one of the children I was working with in a low-income community last year made me really think about being the monster in the room. And this was because this little guy he was so excited to be in the research. And as soon as it came time for, do you want to speak with Michelle? It was just took off, ran in the bathroom, hid in the bathroom. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is not at all what I want for this child. And I don't want to put him in a predicament where now he has to deal with this person in his space, right? So I was having a lot of conversations with the educators around, what do you do in this situation? And one of the things was, you know, the educators, people he really trusted, these were people that had been with him for many weeks, he felt a relationship with, that would say to him, you know, is this something, do you want her to not be here? Is this something you want? Like, and he would say, no, that's okay. But I don't want to talk to her. And we said, that's okay. And I have to say, it really made me think about, you know, giving options, making sure children know they don't have to continue. They don't have to keep working with you. They don't have to keep participating more than what they're doing. And I have to say, at the end of a few weeks, he was probably the person who spoke to me the most. He was so happy, but he only spoke to me on the 4th day. He did not speak to me on the 1st day. And that was because I played with him. I was there. I sat in the sandbox. I sat on the play equipment. I just talked to him about other things. It wasn't about, you know, do you feel comfortable now participating? Do you want to share now? It was, you know, tell me about Minecraft. Tell me about, you know, do you want to, can I help you on the swing, when he was asking me to push him? Like different things like that, that actually make you present, and it's an afforded opportunity. It's not that you're telling the kid they have to speak to you. It's, are you okay with me in this space? And I'm here. I'm here if you want to. And so that buildup of trust was really important there for me. So just because the adults trust you, it doesn't mean the children do. And just because the children trust you, it doesn't mean the adults do. I've been in a lot of different situations where I've felt that the kids are really excited and the parents not so much. They really don't want it. And you have to respect that. You have to respect, if you're doing family-centered work where you're really concentrating on making sure the family is comfortable, if one person's not comfortable, you have to form a strategy in real time about what to do about that. And sometimes it'll consist of, you know, if one child doesn't want to participate, sometimes the parent will say, okay, we'll get, you know, their brother wants to participate. So they don't have to be here. That's okay. They'll go to their room. They'll go elsewhere and play. That's okay. But sometimes it's not okay. Sometimes you actually have to just leave and not encourage things. And that's, I think you develop that as you go, working with different communities. And I think everybody will have their own need within that space. You working with refugee children is very different than working with children in Vancouver. So it's sort of a hit or miss, but I would say you have to go into it thinking you're ready to adapt and you're ready to just be yourself, but also be present for them. And if that opportunity is something that you both want and that family says yes and continues, then trust that, then that's okay. Taking time for more comfort, more response. Oh, more response. I think I meant respect here. But as I said, just making sure that the families are okay with where they're at, with where they're being interviewed. Do you need anything different about this space? Follow-up questions are really, really key. Not just saying, okay, we decided we're meeting at this park. This is the question that I have for you. It's now that we're here, how does this feel? Does this feel okay for you? Looking at the kids, not just the parents when you're saying that. Does this feel okay for you? Is this something that still works? Understand the importance of working with family and children is really important. So what we're finding now, especially in injury prevention, is that we have a lot more voice on topics that maybe would have been less on our radar before. It definitely has cross sections with global health initiatives and understanding areas of need. So burn and fire safety in low-income neighborhoods, for example, we're finding out more about how housing and different social determinants are influencing the number of burns that children experience. Crowded rooms, for example, being harder for families to get out of if there is a fire in the building. Gendered practices, so who is more in the house to operate some of that that equipment that could cause children to get burns. When I was working with refugee families, a lot of this came down to the cooking equipment. Burns were a very big issue for the kids. I'll talk a bit more about this after, so I'll leave this here for now, but certainly we're finding out more as we go about all of these topics that we know are causing injury, but it's how they're causing injury that's coming out more, especially within, I would say, like the qualitative work that I do when we get to some of the nuanced experiences within that. So road traffic safety, struck by and passenger incidents. So more children in Vancouver, for example, will get hit die or be hospitalized from crashes from within the car than actually being a pedestrian. But there's still a lot of issues around parking lots, snow equipment in the winter times and things like that, with people not always seeing kids running around, playing outside. So certainly there have been calls for better policies and interventions, better signage on a lot of the busy roadways for kids, helmet safety policies, making sure that parents understand the role that they have and the modeling that they can do for their kids in this way. So I've spoken a bit about the Lebanon study. I'll engage with it a little bit more here. So I, through one of my partnerships with, as I said, the American University of Beirut, one thing I was really interested in doing was I met Dr. Samar Al-Haj at the World Health Conference, and we both agreed that there was just so much more research that needed to be done in areas where we can not just use sort of this developed nation perspective on what risk is and what parenting is. And you see that a lot even within different nations, that the mindset around risk or the mindset around safety is still very much Western. It's being enforced almost within different sort of realms of scholarship. And that can be very problematic for obvious reasons, I think, that we're not really understanding what's resonating with the people and the families within these regions. So one thing we wanted to understand was what refugee families' perspectives would be on child injuries outdoors, what was causing the injuries around camps and around villages across Lebanon, and what sort of factors were shaping parent and child perspectives on that. So taking it away from when we think of risk, sometimes what we think of for play is activity that is either challenging, exciting. There's not a high chance likely of being seriously injured, so requiring hospitalization, but there's still enough to challenge a child to feel that there's this sort of thrilling experience there. So when we did the study, we decided that we would speak to families at camps and villages and figure this out. And so that was a really beautiful experience for me. I was there for about 2 weeks, and we went to a bunch of different camps and villages across the country. This picture really resonates with me because it was a time when I was playing with these little ones in one of the camps, and they did want their photo taken. So this is all permission from family, from them. They really, really liked photos, so they wanted me to take some of these photos. And this is actually because I did not speak the language, so I was working with the team on the ground. Everybody except 2 of us did speak language and was from the region. So it wasn't just me going into a camp saying, "Hi, I'm here. Would you like to share your perspective?" But really working right through the partnerships that I had there to make sure that in whatever way I could be used for this, that it was the right way. And these were my teammates were people who had experience, with camps, had established partnerships with different camps, and sort of knew the landscape better than I ever could as someone coming into this space. So it was just such a privilege to be able to join them and to learn. And so the kids in this photo, actually, they're not waving, they're telling me to take the photo. So we taught each other that to take a photo, if you wanted during the day, you would count down from 5. So you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you go ch-ch, and that means flash, like do it. And so in the photo, what you'll see is they're actually telling me to do the flash, and then the other little guy's counting to 2. But that's, that's part of the photo. So that's things that you sort of take away. So I think respecting the partnerships, right? Making sure in this way that when you're working with families, as I said, right, know who you are and address that. Don't just go into it thinking, well, because of my training, this sounds silly, but I can do what I want, because you absolutely cannot do what you want. You absolutely have to work with where lived histories are and knowledges, and understanding the traditions of that space and of those families. And to do that, you need to be honest with yourself about who you are and what it might be like for families if you're coming into that space, and what you can be used for, right? How can your training be applied to this position? So as someone who is in population health, as someone who was, I study, play, I study risk, I study injury, I was working with a lot of teammates who were in the medical field. So they did not have the same training I had. So it was a really wonderful sort of merging of understanding and perspective about what the families could be experiencing in a local way, the issues they have around even seeking attention from clinics and hospitals, which was a very dire situation for them. It was about 45 minutes from most of these camps to any sort of clinic, and it was a militarized clinic. Things that came up for us around what we were learning, shaping child injury. It wasn't just, burn safety around cooking. It was, as soon as I step out of the camp boundary, I'm afraid my child will be taken. The kids were telling us they were beaten continually by people outside of the camps, who would throw stones at them, adults and kids, beat them on the head with sticks. A lot of them were assaulted, or there's a lot of attempted rape from workers, because the kids at the age of 13, I would say 90% of the boys in most of the camps we were at were working at 13. And the girls were also trying to work, but would be assaulted more frequently, so they couldn't. So there's this definite dynamic that was different around what the injury exposure was. There was a lot of self-harm within the camps, and mental health feelings. So this one little girl we were working with, the day before, had thrown herself over the wall that separated the military divide to try to be shot, because she didn't want to live anymore and didn't feel that she belonged in the world. And so her mother had to go get her, and they were not shot from that, which was good. But as we were discussing this, and as we were having some of these interviews, the mother was hiding a knife about this big up her sleeve as we were speaking, because she was trying to hide anything that her daughter could use to kill herself because it was an ongoing worry for her. So even during play, she was constantly there with her daughter, making sure that her daughter wouldn't try anything, because she had been trying with knives and things. And they don't have the supports or the clinics or the people there that can help with that all the time. So it's really, you know, in BC, we talk about the downtown east side sometimes. And one thing I came across in literature was that it's its own ecosystem of risk. And I think that that's a really, really sad way of saying there are situations in our world that are so dire, that are so awful, that they're their own ecosystems of injury and risk. And it doesn't mean that they're divided. It doesn't mean that they're not part of the larger conversation or part of what, you know, anything else is. It's just that they're just so dire, and so many more resources are needed. So that was something that the study's, you know, an ongoing one. We are almost done all of our collection now, so I can feel pretty good about what I'm saying about the results of the study. But things like animal bites, right? It was interesting to me because we talk a lot about outdoor play here in Canada and how important it is for kids. And then I was thinking to myself as I was walking around some of these camps where the tents are half on, you know, the homes, and the tents are the homes. And you have 2 cushions on a ground, and that's it for a family of 5. And the tent's hanging on. It's not, so where is the outdoors? Where is outdoor play compared to indoor play, compared to, you know, what's risky? Some of the kids were saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. When you ask, what is risky or what is dangerous? They say, I have no, like, they didn't even understand that question. It didn't translate to their understanding of what that was, because it wasn't for them. For them, it was just about, you know, I play, and play is scary because of where I am, but, you know, it's good. And there's a lot more. Honestly, there's so much more I could say about this, but for the sake of time, I'll continue on. I don't want to get too stuck. Happy to answer more questions about this at the end, certainly. So I have just a question for the group. We'll try to do this pretty fast, but what to use a serious injury? I'm just curious, and we'll work from there. Off the top of your head, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to think too hard about it. So what is a serious injury to you? Okay. Life altering. Ah, spoken like a medical professional. Trauma leading to long-term consequences, a head injury, a broken bone, trauma, things that require hospital visits, injury that seriously impacts a person's ability to function, long-lasting effect, head injury. Okay, so there's a theme here. Yeah. So these are all great, obviously really interesting responses. Yeah, so we see this a lot in, a big part of what I do is I literally will go to families and say, what do you think is a serious injury? What do you think is a big injury? And it's interesting because we're trying to bridge communications. There can be serious differences between how doctors and practitioners communicate serious injury language, you know, trauma language to families, compared to how that is discussed within the family's home or within the members. That difference is important, right? The fact that the language that we're using a lot of the time as health professionals, as people who have this education, right, in working with families, the fact that that language can change with the families is something we need to engage with further. We need to understand what the differences are in how language is being communicated. Sharon says, I'm the program coordinator for Kids First North at the Sandy Bay, and I am hoping to gain more relations to empower children. Up here in the North, children don't really have a voice. Yeah, and that's, thanks for sharing that, Sharon. And I think that's true for, honestly, a lot of the kids that you can work with, right? They're not used to really being the priority of a researcher, to not just have it be a peripheral thing that's happening within the study. So I think that's interesting. And so I think the important thing, I'll just open up my slides again. So I think that the interesting part of what everybody said, so trauma, head-related injuries, yeah, I mean, that's what we see a lot, right? If I did a study where I looked at data with families from across different regions of Canada, not all over Canada, but I think it was 2 metropolitan areas. And we asked them what sort of injury was to them with a kid. And they had different categories for that. So one was broken bones, one was head-related trauma, hospitalization, and debilitation. So you could call this life-altering, right? I've heard this term used a lot by doctors, life-altering. Now, what's interesting to me about this is that as much as we think, okay, this could represent broader categories, be conscientious about who that can apply to, right? So people in rural areas who have poor access sometimes to the clinics or the hospitals, maybe serious injury is one where you actually have to just go to a hospital because you can't deal with it at home. You can't mend within the family. For children in the refugee camp, right? Serious injury was one where you actually need to go to the clinic because if not, you don't have supports. You need to deal with it on your own. And for military families, I was working in my PhD with the Department of National Defense. To those families, a serious injury was not a broken bone. It was not something that only required hospitalization. It had to be life-altering because there is a big differentiation between what an injury was versus being hurt. And that was from their exposure to war and conflict and witnessing these sort of atrocities on a different scale. So seeing a gunshot wound, this is a quote I'll always remember, but you know, a gunshot wound is on a different order of magnitude than a cut or a bruise or broken bone. And differentiating that, right? Seeing how families can differentiate that because of their experience is really important to understand. Because if we keep working through a frame of this is what we know to be a serious injury, this is how we know families deal with it, we're losing a lot of that voice within thinking that, because families are dealing with these really horrible things when they happen, injuries, right? In all different ways. And I think engaging with that is really important. So for families, perspectives on what constitutes a serious injury can be shaped by gender, society, culture, family, intergenerational values, health conditions, identity, geography. And we can think of family as at times the closest social system and network that we are part of that organizes how we function, think, and behave, and what we value. And we see this when we work with families and with children, and what their children echo in terms of their needs. I should say one of my findings has been over the past few years that children will also speak differently about injury compared to their parents. A large part of this is they will speak in similar ways, but an element for children is also the issue of play, the issue of being able to be with friends and explore. And if that's taken away, so an injury not only being a broken bone, but an injury being something that takes away time with friends, an injury being something that takes away time with exploration or with fun. So they have different concentrations on what the injury means for them, right? As opposed to just the pain. It's also taking away that time from what they're able to do. Social signaling is big. So children will typically look at sort of other peers in their environment to adjust sort of their expectations for their behavior and for their action. They do this within the family as well. So for example, I think the simplest way to say this is if you look, when we think of the modeling aspect, when we think of a parent getting afraid of a spider, if you look at very, very young children who watch, let's say, you know, their father look at a spider and go, get really freaked out, the child will likely start to draw back, right? They're looking for opportunities to react. They want to know, right, about what they should fear, about what they should be worried about or consider. And so they're learning all the time about that, right? At the ages of 3 to 12 for social related learning of safety are huge for development. There are strategies we see people in older ages also actually employ the same strategies towards injury prevention as they learned when they were 10 years old. So what they're learning throughout that time, especially during peer related play, is really important for them. And when they're away from their families, they'll typically look at people that look like them, people that maybe are around the same age they're judging, swinging on a swing, seeing, okay, that girl's going that high, that means I can probably do it. Or maybe that girl's looking like she's really afraid, and I know I was nervous because I was on a swing and I fell off and my pinky bled that one time. This is actually a quote I'm using, by the way. So if you see that as a child, you're constantly learning about what you may or may not like, what to avoid, what to interact with, what brings you joy. And so they do this through social signaling. It's a big thing. And it can dictate sort of what their threat assessment is away from adults. I've been doing more work in the realm of microcultural development. I think it's a fascinating area, but it's more towards how children are developing peer communities, typically when they have opportunities away from adults, what the new structures, traditions are, and roles they give themselves are away from adults, and why. So more recently, I've been doing this through understanding competitiveness in kids and play, and how it's actually a way for them to sort of challenge a lot of the adult enforced rules or protocols for behavior. And they'll become adventurers in a tree fort, and very competitive towards racing games, and not care as much about what they cared about before in terms of social constructs like gender, actually. So a very fascinating way that if you let kids organize their own behavior and injury prevention strategies, they can do that quite well, actually, away from adults. And then trust and accessible information and communication is essential for them. So feeling like they always know there's someone they can go to help is really key. Now we're dealing with new technologies, right? Cell phone uses. Some parents even track their kids when they're outside. So that has brought in a whole new wealth of information relative to how children are practicing safety strategies and how they're avoiding injury. And a lot of this comes through digital devices at very, very young ages, to know that they can phone their parent or their guardian at any time to say, hey, I need some help with this, I'm lost. So having safety, some would call crutches, is a new realm of research that's really opening up our view on how technology is changing threat navigation for kids at very early ages. And so I would encourage you also to engage with that a bit in your work, because a lot of children will have access to devices, and they will base their safety strategies heavily on what access they have to those devices. So I spoke a bit about the emergency room study. For the sake of time, I'm just going to continue on. I think I have some tools I want to go over with everybody. But this is really about the work I'm doing with emergency room doctors to understand their exposure to pediatric injuries in hospitals in their own training, their medical training, and then what that actually can do. So how that exposure to seeing traumatic injuries with kids being part of the recovery process, how that can then translate to their own safety practices with their children at home. And from what I'm seeing so far, there's definitely, I would say, within the preliminary stuff, I would say there's definitely this relationship between witnessing traumatic injury, but also the impact of the injury. It's not just about witnessing an injury. And that's something I want to draw a lot of attention to within this conversation with all of you, is it's not just about the injury itself, suffering pain. When you ask people why they fear things, it's not just, I don't want to be in pain. It's, I don't want to be taken away from my family. I don't trust the medical system. I have a history, of my community being very discriminated against within this space. I don't want to go see a doctor. It's about, time away from community, from friends. There's more. It's more than just the injury itself. It's what the injury represents to the family. That can be really scary. That is life altering. So for the purposes of the last half, or the last little while together, What I'm going to do instead of the toolkit development is I'm going to go through some of the tools that I use now. And hopefully some of those can resonate. If you want, you can take notes. We can have discussions about that. And I will stay on at 11:30. And so then we can talk together. We can discuss some of the tools that I go over instead. Okay. Okay. And Jackie, I can't see the chat, so if anything comes up, please just let me know. That's okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So something that I've been more engaged with throughout my work is an idea called empowering relations. It's by Holt. And it's really about creating opportunities for children to draw meaning from our work with them. So this consists of different ways of sort of working with children. One of them is asking them and their families what works and what doesn't work. So making sure, once again, that you're taking sort of due diligence to actually follow up with the family. Making sure people are familiar with what they're being asked is also a way for them to feel that they have more choice relative to what they're asked to do. So for example, if I'm working with children and I'm asking a child, would you like to speak with me in an interview? You'd use different language around this, but I might then say to the child who, if I notice that that child has not been as actively showing that they would like to participate the same way as let's say their friend did. One thing you can also do is help familiarize the child with what's expected of them as part of their engagement with you. So I could say to them, would you like to know a few of the questions that I might ask? Would you want to see what that could feel like? You know, if you're able to, and if their friend's doing an interview, do you want to watch what happens? Given the parameters of whatever it is you're doing. But that familiarization can play a really key role in helping children in a short amount of time with you feel comfortable deciding for themselves what their expectations are relative to their participation. And this can really help more than just saying to even a family, right? I'm going to interview you. For a lot of families, and I'm using interviews because that's what I do. This is the method I'm just going back to as an example. But a lot of the time we sort of, I think, forget that the families coming into this is a very new thing, right? For us, we might be researchers or policymakers or people involved in program development and implementation, but for them, that's completely new, that they are just trying to share their perspective on something. So familiarizing them with what it is you do, what research is, what they're contributing to as more than just that voice, can help them feel that they have a choice in whether or not they want to participate, and it can help them feel more comfortable with what their expectations are. It can also help bring in rich data. So when a child understands that I'm looking more for a story of their past injury experience than just a perspective on something and what a story could mean, they might be more willing to share a story and lead into that themselves throughout the next half an hour of working with me. If I only ask them for perspective and I don't give them that context, then it's very possible I'll miss those opportunities to, get voice or get perspective that I'm really trying to target within the intervention I'm trying to set up. So being transparent and making sure that you're offering as many possibilities for change or for voice is really important. Providing adaptable and child-led opportunities, right? So asking before things start, forming advisory boards before they start. I'm sure a lot of us do work with different types of advisory boards or partner boards. Those are really key parts. They're parts that shouldn't be overlooked, and they shouldn't be just considered as part of the process of ethics, right? It's something that you can use to better inform the tools you're using with the families to get that data, to get that engagement. So What is it, right? Spend patient time. Be patient with the process of it before, so that you know you have the resources that are lined up that work well within that space. I think a lot of choice and voice, right? Making sure that your research is intentional towards promoting the child or the family voice, and that is what the purpose of the research is, not that it's an afterthought, especially if you're developing things that are led by community, that this is about what they need. It's led by them. They have say if they want to change something. So in essence, the way I think of empowering relations are their relationships that we can all have to build. We can build relationships, with children that are intentionally developed to promote the voice of the child, deepen understanding of children's unique needs within the context of their engagement, and they're constructed to provide children with opportunities to pull on the reins, right? To not feel as if you are the person coming in dictating exactly what they have to do, but that you're providing opportunities for them to decide if this is something that resonates. And if it's not, to take the reins, pull them, and decide, hey, I want to suggest something. I want to say that this isn't working. I want to suggest a different way of doing that. Is really important. And then I've spoken at length about the refugee study, so I'll go on to the next one. Reflexivity is a big part. So making sure you're sort of always revisiting who you are as a person, what your knowledge is, and what you bring to the table. Processes of humbling ourselves are really important, right? Being engaged. So what role do you have in all of this? I won't ask the group question, but it's really about this process of understanding, right? Who am I relative to this community? If I'm an outsider to it, what does that mean? What seat do I have to take then? And making sure that the communities or the families feel that they are leading in that way, if that's what the research is set up as. So what do parents actually fear? That comes out more when you can engage with who you are relative to the community. So if I know I'm working with the families in Lebanon, then I am not coming in with this assumption that I know everything about what they're about to tell me, because that's the wrong way to do research in general. But also, I think it's the wrong way to get to have the family share voice. So in quantitative research, we usually talk about outliers, right? And these sort of differences that we see. And I think what's really interesting to me is that in qualitative research or some of this other engagement work, the outlier can be really important. We can really, we really care about the people who aren't fitting within the theme. If I find that 8 out of, 10 families are saying one thing, but 2 are not, that's important. Why are they not saying that? Is there something within that perspective that really needs to be voiced alongside the people who are the majority in that case? So really diving into the complexities, I think, of who's not fitting within what you thought originally, or understanding the nuances is so important into change, making actionable change, because it's the people typically within this space we're trying to get who are not voiced as much. So creating space to be wrong or need to adapt is really essential. Challenging our stereotypical beliefs all the time, doing deep work in this way is so essential. And I think of reflexivity as deeply interrogating what we think we know, not with the intention of convincing ourselves we are wrong, but with the intention to create opportunity to use ongoing information that we acquire to reshape our thoughts until a conclusion is reached that is agreed upon by parties the decision influences. So I know that's pretty lengthy, but bringing it back to sort of what is the work I'm trying to do within challenging my beliefs, and what is the conclusion of that work I'm doing for the families it's influencing. Not just what did I make up my mind about after thinking about it for a while. It's what does this now mean in terms of the translation for the family, the internal thinking that I've had. So linking it back then to opportunities and asking, right? I always come back to when people ask me, what do you think about this? with injury. And I'm thinking, well, did we ask them? Did we ask the people that it's influencing at all? Did we ask families? Did we ask the kids? What did they say? Right? What do we have data on that they actually said, that they actually think or experience? And I think reflexivity is just a process of always grounding ourselves in that, right? Of how it's influencing the other parties involved. There are also, there's been this strategy I've been using more. I call it this. This is not something I got from the literature, but I consider it the vantage point. So I think we all have so many different privileges and all these different vantage points that we use to understand the world, that come from who we are, how we identify, where our places are. And for kids, it can be the same thing, right? So when I was working with a child who was just this this little boy who was in a playground with me, and I remember him saying, "Do you see that sign up there?" And it was a don't smoke sign. And he said, "I can't see that. I don't think people should smoke." This was when he was asked about what would make the environment safer. And he said, "I like signs. I think signs are good for people to have to remind them what not to do. But we can't see them. People like me can't see them." I was like, "Oh, people like you, what does that mean?" Because he was in a big group of his friends, right? All of them were boys. And he says, "I'm tiny." He says, "I'm really short and all of my friends are really big and I'm always going to be short, but I want to be able to see things too." And I thought that that was so good for me to understand, right? To welcome me to his world, to say, well, from my point of view, the things that I need are not the things I'm getting, but my friends are getting them because they can see them. But other people like me who might be short aren't getting them. And I loved that. And I love that experience, right? That's the when I was talking about outliers before in quantitative, right? That's the type of experience that it needs to be engaged with, because if it's a way to find a medium to actually offer that in the world, right? Better signage for children of all different heights, of all different ages, communities, that matters. That's the work we're trying to do, right? Is bettering community, bettering the opportunities that families have to seek care, or to have activities. So part of that engagement is understanding their vantage points, how they differ, right? Is it that their son is small? Is it that their child has an implant for hearing and they can't hear the ball or the traffic on the side of the street, so they need that sign there, or they need that supervision from their parent because they're worried. They're worried they're going to get hit by a car. And we see that all the time. So understanding those nuances is really important. Now, there are a lot of different tools that are starting to come out. I mean, we've used art-based methods for a very long time. Just out of curiosity, the people that I can see on the video, can you raise your hand if you've heard about arts-based methods, or maybe you've used them in your own work with families? Arts-based methods is really the use of any sort of art form to understand perspective or experience from families. So working with kids through drawings, for example. There was this little girl I was working with who was on the autism spectrum, and we had time together where they could pick 3 different coloring crayons. I was working with an integration aide in the school, and she would tell the class, "Okay, you can pick 3 different colors to show us how you feel today." And that was so good, because for some of the children who didn't want to voice how they were feeling to the classroom, right? And I'm sure if we all think back to when we were kids, we didn't always want to do that. So having opportunities to do it in other ways when we still wanted to show how we felt, but we didn't really want to say it, or we didn't want to draw attention to anything, that can provide a lot of in-depth way to show what the experience is, right, in an alternative form. So arts-based methods can be really good with families and with kids for this purpose, to give a different outlet for these thoughts and experiences. So I was working with this little girl, and all of the children were picking up crayons that were, blue or pink or red, and she just picked black. She picked black and gray, and she was so upset that day, and she didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want to say it was wrong. but she wanted to express it, and that was important. And so she just colored the whole paper in black. And I said, do you want to talk about it? And she just said, no. And so we sat, but I understood. Then I could understand at least that this is the space she's in right now. This is something that she's going through. And if there's a way I can help, I'll try to sort that out. Maybe I'll talk to the integration grade after to see if there's a way that we can, like, help in a way that resonates with the girl. But it's an alternative form of expression. And we use this more and more in research, especially with children and with families, because first of all, it can be playful. It can be something that keeps them, actually brings meaning to them, not just them telling you a perspective, but them having fun. Fun and play is a way that children take life very seriously. It's their exploration of the world, right? They are investigators when they are at play. That's how they're learning, and that's how they're experiencing life. So if you integrate that as much as possible, fun, meaning making, into the process of engagement, even if it's you standing in a hallway with a family for 5 minutes, if you can find ways to be playful, using your affect, right, differently, not just sitting there with a stern face, but looking at the kid as well as the parent. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just get down on my knees for a second, just when I talk to the child, and if that feels right to do, if that feels like what is helpful, and bringing it down, right, to the vantage point, bringing it down to understanding what the child's going through at the same time is really important. And that be playful as much as possible. Poetry, music, theater plays, these are all ways that can resonate with different families. I've used photo elicitation quite often. So the use of photography, where I will ask children, and this is something I did in my work in Vancouver, can you take photos? Would you like to take some photos of what you feel is safe outside, what you feel is dangerous, what you feel is injury provoking? So what you get are these expressions you wouldn't always get just with the child talking to me under a tree. I would get pictures of, beautiful colored saturation photos. Children are so tech savvy, oh my goodness. But of these beautiful trees in the park with the beautiful green leaves, and they up the saturation. And this is all within 5 minutes, and they hand it back to me and they say, this is what I like. I said, so you like nature? I said, I love nature. But she didn't have to tell me I love nature, because I could see it. I could see that she spent time on that photograph, taking that photograph of nature, and that 5 out of 15 of her photos were of, the field, or of her friends playing next to flowers. So you see, right, what the child can see a little bit differently than you would just having that said to you. And the same for risk, right? When you're asking a child, what do you fear? And they're talking about, the signage, or they're talking about, a lot of children now are illness conscious. They don't want to get germs on them. COVID probably intensified this, but I was getting photos of unsafe environments that were, suntan lotion bottles and water fountains, because they need to stay hydrated, and medical masks that were disposed on the ground as being dirty and could transmit viruses, and that's unsafe. Way more than I had some of the other stuff in those conversations. So it's a very interesting sort of way to gain perspective from the family. And these are used with all different communities, right, to better understand, especially as an outsider, just alternative forms of expressing. Storytelling, right, as a way of, that can be very important to many communities, as a way to share thoughts and feelings. And then there are different ways to use tools, right? So I know in psychology, some of the stuff that we use in surveys or in questionnaires can be more child-friendly. So we do the validation processes differently, and then we use something like a pain scale or a feeling scale, where children can circle how they feel based on the happy faces or sad faces. So there are all different ways to sort of adapt the language that we're using. And even in those questionnaires that you send out, or even if in that brief amount of time you're with someone in a hallway speaking, using language that resonates, thinking before you enter that space, okay, if I'm saying this, if I'm talking about injury, if I'm talking about, physical activity programming with this family, how can I shape the conversation within this finite amount of time to make sure that what I'm saying is a language that is resonating with who I'm speaking to. So it's not that I'm using all these big terms, and it's also not that I'm babying the person and making them feel awful, because that's never the goal. It's about meeting people where they're at, right? Making sure that we're doing some sort of work beforehand to understand who the family is that we're working with, to try as much as possible, ask questions, do our homework, right? To make sure that that's going to resonate. So an example
Michelle,
is,
sorry, just because I know some people are probably gonna, it's 11:30 or almost
oh yeah, okay.
11:30, and so I know if you're
Yeah, yeah.
able to stay, we are still recording and we'll be getting all of this information, but if you do need to leave right at 11:30, I know other people always have other things, or at least I know I do. So I just want to express thank you. When you close off, if you do leave, you should get an evaluation link, and we would really appreciate having your feedback. We will be sending out an email after as well, just to connect with everybody. And I apologize, Michelle. Please go
No,
on, but I
that's
just know in
totally
case some
okay.
people have to leave. So
I no, I completely respect that. I am about to wrap up. I just have one more slide. So, and then I'll be staying for questions for anybody who wants to have a bit more of a discussion. But I appreciate that, Jackie. So one thing that has come out more recently is about children's pain, and this is a really underdeveloped area that we've had historically, is understanding the pain that children go through. So different scales have been used in this work to really understand what children are experiencing. So feeling scales like what I'm showing you here. And so as an example, I thought this was interesting, but our understanding of pain care for children is about 15 to 20 years out of date. So there's a lot more to learn about this, and engaging in some of these strategies and tools as we do that can be really important for issues like pain. And so the last thing I'll discuss today involves engaged listening. And I think that this is a practice that can help us in all forms of our life. It helps to work towards empowering voice as much as we can. And it's giving ourselves cues to remind ourselves of what we want to draw attention to within the conversations afterwards. So providing people not just with chances to speak, but for yourselves to actually be involved in that conversation. I was doing an exercise recently where we were tasked with just listening for 5 minutes. The person had to talk for 5 minutes, and then we had to flip that. And the other person had to remain silent. And it was hard. People were finding it very difficult. A lot of the time, our minds are racing, our thoughts are racing, and we're always putting things together for what we want to contribute to or what we want to say. It is very difficult for us in today's age to be able to take a little bit of a breather when someone's speaking to us and be completely immersed in it to the best of our ability. And I think that that's a skill we would all really benefit from. So there are ways to practice this, ways to center our breath, ways to just listen, that we can give ourselves cues. So sometimes when I'm speaking with a family, I'll think, okay, this is something they said that I really want to touch on after. Let that go. Keep that thought, keep that cue within your mind, but listen. Don't start going down the rabbit hole of thinking about what that means and why you want to say it. Just take a breather and find something that works for you with engaged listening. I don't think everybody listens the same or has the same needs, but finding what works within a space of, I feel I heard what this person said, right? Whether or not you disagree or agree, it's not the point. The point is to understand what's being said, to keep it with you in some way, and then to be able to engage with it. And that's hard. It's hard to balance both verbal and nonverbal cues, making sure, especially with children and families, you are present. That person is with you for 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes to show that you care. So when someone's speaking to you, not just speaking stern face like this, but sometimes breaking that up with smiling at the child as the parent's talking to you, making sure they're involved. You're not just talking to the parent. And similarly, you're not just talking to the child. You smile at the parents. When I was with the refugee camps, I was continually, whenever I felt it was right, I would try to smile at people that we're not involved in interviews, right? Just around in the community to show you're in a community. You're not just with this family. You're being welcomed into this space by a lot of people who are watching and trying to understand and deciding for themselves if they want to speak with you. So being approachable is a big part, I think, of being able to form trusted connections very quickly with people. And be honest with yourself and those you work with. Explain why you may be taking notes or making observations. Having a cell phone to take notes in front of my face as I'm speaking with a family is very different than me explaining to a family or a child, do you mind if when you're speaking, sometimes I just look and I'll just take a note? And that way we can talk about that more right after, right? So that being transparent about what you're doing while they're talking. No one wants to feel evaluated. If you pull out a paper and you start writing down notes about, as this person's talking to you, they don't want to feel evaluated. They want to feel that you're listening. So if you explain that the processes you're using are helping you listen, that helps the families. That then shows the families, okay, I'm trusting that when you're doing this other stuff while I'm speaking, it's not against me, it's actually helping me. Intentionally use the space. So children can tell if you're honest, reliable, and trustworthy. They are very, very good at discerning whether or not someone is and whether or not that person deserves their time. So be consistent with what you expect from them and their loved ones. Be honest about it and be transparent as much as you can be for them to decide if that is something that they want to be doing. So instructions need to be clear, they need to be concise, and they should be consistent. So I am going to end there. Thank you for listening to me for an hour and a half. It was really lovely to meet all of you and to engage with this. I'll just stay on if anybody wants to have conversations about anything I've discussed or any of their work. I'm happy to do that. So thank you again, and thank you, Jackie and Robin, for inviting me, and to the networks in Saskatchewan that have joined me today. Thank you.